So I'd like to make a quick video that introduces ways in which we can explore the question, why does the inner dance happen the way it does? Maybe from a physiological point of view. I'd like to look at the brain and the spine today. So for now, maybe we could draw a brain and then let's pretend this is the brain and this is the brain stem. This tube right here could represent the spine, and if we were to bring this up within a spiritual process, you may as well draw the chakra systems there. So as many might know, this is the root, the sacrum, the solar plexus, the heart, the throat, the third eye, and the crown. And when we look at the spine in correlation with this, then it's the endocrine glands that build the bridgeway between the biological and the energetic. So we're looking more at the pituitary gland, the pineal gland, the thyroid, the thymus, the adrenals, the reproductive, and the root. So one of the things I want to explore with this is the framework on okay, I mentioned the word movement, but what we're actually talking about here is control and autonomy. This is taken up in the Vesica Pisces video. I want to look at it in a different way, because this might serve as a more basic introduction to the autonomic nervous system, or this part of the human body that acts on its own intelligence. So it's going to be really useful to start to visualize this. So the autonomic nervous system is basically made up of two systems. It's actually three, but let's just talk about the two major ones. The sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system would be the language of excitement and fear. Red is good for that somehow. And for the parasympathetic, it would be trust and, let's say, rest. Let's maybe give a green light for that. So going back to this, you've experienced it probably, or you've watched these videos, you've even held bodies, you realize that the spine has something to do with the energy. The spine is normally seen as a vertical thing, but when people undergo the stages of the healing and the stages of the awakening process, the spine starts to curve. Sometimes the back arches, so it's almost like the top of the body wants to meet or come closer to the lower part of the body, and there's this massive opening within the centrifuge, like the heart space. I want to talk about the relationship between three major regions. I want to name them because they speak huge what is intrinsic and inbuilt in us that we seldom notice. Now, when you first look at the parasympathetic nervous system, the PSNS, there are afferent and efferent neurons that extend from the spine that either sends signals from the brain towards the rest of the body. So for example, the higher area of the spine is called the cranium, and the middle areas would be the thoracic and the lumbar, and then the lower would be called the sacral. Now, the afferent and efferent neurons basically extend from the cranium, the thoracic and the lumbar region, the sacral region, so that there are these signals, these small highway systems brought about by synaptic connections that allow for this communication from head to toe. You know, like you have all of these nerves situated across the whole body that communicates, whether it be fear, whether it be temperature, whether it be pressure, whether it be sound, whether it be light, whether it be language. Extending from all of these is either we're sending impulses from here all the way to the rest of the body, and then at the same time, those are called efferent neurons. Now, afferent neurons, on the other hand, send signals that when I touch this, I can feel it somehow in my brain. When you conduct an inner dance, a lot of the movements are being controlled by the autonomic nervous system. So when you look at these terminologies, there's something slow and there's something fast that's always in conversation with each other. And there's a history, there's a story there in how that personally works and how that story is ever like shifting. So the sympathetic nervous system basically extends from here. So let's focus on fear. Maybe we can just put excitement there as well. So when we experience fear and excitement, when we experience the palpitation, the fastness of the heartbeat, the breath rate, the quickening of the brain states, there is a region of the spine where sensory stimuli would communicate with the central nervous system in the brain. So when you're actually experiencing back problems that are centered on this area, or let's say we can just speak about in the healing process, your hands would go to the chest, go to the heart. What you're actually communicating with is the thoracolumbar region of the spine. So that just by focusing on that, and you don't have to touch, there might be certain stimuli that you can use to effectively awaken these, which hold a role in the regulation of the organism or the human being. You can actually communicate with the rest of the body just by focusing on the nerves that extend from the thoracolumbar. Now, the more interesting and complex aspect would actually be the parasympathetic nervous system. So there's this trusting, restive aspect of the peripheral nervous system that has to do with trust and rest, so that when you can relax, when you can be in the space, you can activate these. You can send out certain neurotransmitters that slow things down. It could be like serotonin, it could be acetylcholine. So that would answer why there might be two empty boxes that are at the top and at the bottom of the spine, like around the root area and around where the spine meets the brain stem. This would be where the parasympathetic nervous system resides. So isn't that interesting? So let's make it blue. It helps to understand the trust resides on both these areas. Like it's at the top of the bottom. So in many ways, when people talk about the Kundalini rising experience, people like to imagine that Shakti energy would rise up from here and maybe try to make it all the way to the top. But when you look at this mapping, that is actually only halfway true. One of the elements that allows for the rising of the so-called Kundalini is, in fact, an energy that doesn't rise, but it falls. It falls. So there is more or less an evolution at work whenever like an involution takes place. So here's where we configure that for an intuition in the body to rise, the mind has to let go. Control that's being held within thought systems basically needs to release, to surrender, to trust, and then an instantaneous collapse takes place. So that in many ways, the highest chakra is in fact, maybe you could redraw this. It is in fact the heart. It's the middle. It's the middle space. In so many ways of explaining it, the heart is actually the brain. So much of the signals that the brain sends out is in fact a feedback loop based on what the heart initially sends out. When a person experiences anxiety or fear or excitement, there's something about the heartbeat that co-implicates the brain. So that once the signals that are coordinated through the endocrine system start to wire together, the entire body is affected. So maybe one way of understanding this story of stuckness and blockages, when the heart initially held space for the small child, a lot of our tension began from a center point that then sent energies from the middle space to the cranium and the sacral. So that whether it be judgment or illusion, or whether it be fear and a physical structuring, this is the key somehow. And there's a reason why we are being asked to come back to the heart, because we actually departed from the heart. When we try to think about the chakra system as purely like a linear thing and a vertical thing, many people are so focused on the rising of the Kundalini, so that it breaks through so many of the blockages that are step by step, preventing it from shooting through into the point of transcendence. What the body would hold for us is understanding that spirit must descend unto material and the physical needs to rise up into the mental and the spiritual. So these three regions need to be balanced with each other to allow that to happen. When too much emphasis is placed upon the sacral, when you present a spiritual awakening that is so sacral based, or when you present a transformation process that's very much predominant here, it becomes very difficult to allow a correlationality between like all of these. It was mentioned in some of the Zoom calls that we've had in last weeks that the womb, the heart, and the mind, when we reach a point of origin, a point in convergence, they are actually in the origins of things all the same. It doesn't mean that they're all one. It means that they're the same. It means that we can experience that the mind, the heart, and the womb are actually all mirrors of the same process. The indigo, the green, and the orange. The womb, the heart, and the mind are in fact mirroring each other. And there's a disconnect somehow historically that listened to this a lot because it was afraid to die. It didn't want to retain its interconnections. It didn't want to stay one. And in the unitive state, for some reason, we have disconnected the body with the mind. So if you want to really address possible ways to facilitate the energy while also wishing to understand more about the body, there's a mind that's acting on its own, that is issuing these out, and this is allowing all of that to become visible in the realms of science and of medicine. It is believed that the autonomic nervous system is something you cannot control. Control in this worldview speaks about the relationship between, let's say, these are your senses. Let's say this is put vision down here, maybe let's put touch, audition being related to sound, could put like pain, pressure. It's not really like this. It's scattered across the whole body. It's a very, very complex thing. Basically, an afferent neuron brings the experience of the world that enters these sensory motor portals that then brings messages to the brain, so that when the brain makes decisions on what is integrating from here, it then sends all of these back. So one of the reasons why inner dance happens is found here. It's actually the interconnections that takes place between these realities, like electricity, balance, magnetism, color, shapes, geographies. Like you take all of these in, and then you bring them here so that you can have a one picture of the world. And that could be the ego, that could be the mind, that could be your thoughts. And as you process, as you make quick judgments about the environment, like is it dangerous? Is it safe? Can I trust? Can I rest? Taking out these interpretations and simply understanding that there was a point when there were no differences between these. The inner dance process takes place whenever there is a co-activation between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. But what is happening right now is we live in a reality where when we want to excite ourselves, we turn this on and we shut this off. You know, you drink coffee, you listen to loud music, and then when you want to relax, you turn this on, and then you turn that off. The inner dance takes place when there's a co-activation between these. And in so many ways, the human has forgot how to turn these on simultaneously. The manifestations of the co-implication of SNS and PSNS, when they're both at the same time, is largely to do with time perception. Whenever you simultaneously activate the thoracic and lumbar and the cranium and the sacral, simultaneously, all at the same time, an inner dance happens. It's similar with when people take psychedelics and people go into the near death and people go through the Kundalini rising. That time perception just explodes. It expands. And when you go back to singularization, that doesn't experience this in a lateral way. So let's say if you're experiencing this, you shut this off, and then when you experience this, you shut this off. Time perception would become linear again, you know. We go back into the clockworks. But when you learn to activate the masculine and the feminine simultaneously, you actually erase time as we know it. So in many ways, this is being reconfigured, and if you want to really understand the deeper levels of facilitation of the inner dance process, these will be quite useful to know later. Like for now, I'm just introducing these concepts as it's mapped out from a basic diagram. But when you start to look at differences in the music, different ways of in fact holding the space behind the head, holding the space on around the chest, the shoulders, you know, the higher part of the abdomen. And then when you go into the sacral, you can see a lot of people instantaneously go there to awaken this thing that's supposedly hiding and lodged there that wants to like shoot up. This is where the structure rises. Like, do we really want to understand what's at place when we're like holding bodies? Like, what is the system? So the arms are an extension of the heart. The legs and the head are extensions of the parasympathetic nervous system in the cranium and the sacral. So it pays to start touching certain parts of these and certain parts that extend through here. You know, sometimes you might touch the toes or the ankles or the knees. What does it mean that you like to shake certain body parts, whether it be like the legs or the hips, the sacral? Why do you go there sometimes? It's because you're learning to speak this language. You're learning to co-activate these one by one, turning these on. Sometimes you turn this on and then you want to turn that on, and then sometimes you want to go there. It's not very literal, because sometimes one opens all the rest. Sometimes one opens one, and very often the sacral is connected to the throat. The throat. The mind is connected to the solar plexus. The heart is very much connected to the root. But sometimes you open one, you open all the other ones. To go into a whole systems healing process, though, you need to experiment with all of them. Sometimes one by one, sometimes in correlation with a few, and it's really the quieter experimentations that will give you a more holistic picture of how this works. So I hope it's not too much, and if it is, maybe you can review it alongside with the Vesica Pisces video that actually talks about the same thing, but this time this is a little bit more grounded. So thank you for listening, and I hope you picked something up from this. Love, love.